the depths of a remote mountain valley where mist clung to ancient pines like gossamer veils, stood a solitary cabin. Its weathered timber walls bore witness to countless seasons, but none as haunting as the one that now unfolded within. Clara Hart, a woman once vibrant with life, now stood at the threshold of despair, her soul teetering on the precipice of madness. The sun's dying rays painted the sky in hues of blood and gold as Clara gazed out the cabin's lone window. Her reflection, a ghostly apparition, stared back with hollow eyes that had long since ceased to sparkle. 2 moons had waxed and waned since David, her beloved, had been torn from her arms by the cruel hands of fate. Now, in this self-imposed exile, she sought solace but found only the echoing emptiness of her own fractured heart. As twilight descended, Clara moved through the cabin like a wraith, her movements mechanical and devoid of purpose. She arranged wildflowers in a chipped vase, their vibrant petals a stark contrast to the dull ache that permeated her being. The gas heater sputtered to life, its warmth unable to penetrate the chill that had settled in her bones. A meager meal lay untouched on the worn table, a pitiful offering to the memory of happier times. In the oppressive stillness, time began to warp and bend. The ancient clock on the wall ticked with maddening precision, yet each time Clara's gaze fell upon it, the hands seemed to dance a macabre waltz. They jerked backward, then lurched forward, as if mocking her attempts to cling to reality. She shook her head, desperate to dispel the fog of fatigue that clouded her mind, but sleep had become as elusive as the peace she so desperately sought. As night unfurled its inky cloak across the valley, Clara found herself propped against the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed upon the door that stood slightly ajar. It beckoned to her, a portal to the world of the living, yet she remained frozen, paralyzed by a nameless dread that coiled in the pit of her stomach. The witching hour arrived, heralded by a soft tapping at the window. Clara's heart, once dormant, now thundered in her chest as she crept across creaking floorboards. Moonlight spilled through the glass, illuminating a figure shrouded in shadows. Hope, that cruel mistress, flared within her. David? The name escaped her lips as a trembling whisper. The figure stepped into the pale light, and Clara's fragile hope shattered like spun glass. The face that greeted her was not her beloved's, but a grotesque reflection of her deepest fears. Sunken eyes bore into her soul, igniting memories of laughter by the fireside before morphing into a visage of decay. Panic seized her, and she stumbled backward, her wrists snapping like brittle kindling as she fell. The specter's twisted grin brandished yellowed teeth as it hissed, "You can't escape us." The words slithered across her skin, a venomous reminder of her loss. Clutching her injured arm, Clara fled to the illusory safety of her bed. But as her eyes closed, reality shifted once more. Daylight assaulted her senses, and she found herself seated at the table, flowers arranged, heater crackling, the clock's relentless ticking a maddening constant. Days blurred together in an excruciating dance of familiarity. The phantom at the window whispered echoes of happier times, hope that twisted like a dagger in her heart, and always, the throbbing pain of her fractured wrist that refused to heal. On what might have been the 4th or 5th iteration of this torment, Clara made a desperate choice. She ventured beyond the cabin's walls, into the crisp mountain air that tasted of freedom. Yet as she pressed forward, something deep within her soul whispered a warning. "Leave me alone," she screamed into the void of the forest, lashing out at innocent trees. The world responded with a subtle shift, a rustling whisper that taunted, "You chose this." With each passing day, Clara confronted the depths of her despair. The stranger returned, its face a kaleidoscope of loved ones lost and found. Each incarnation revived her sorrow, forcing her to relive the agony of loss. As dawn broke once more, Clara stood before the specter which now wore David's face. "I won't let you control me any longer," she declared, her voice trembling with newfound resolve. But in that moment of defiance, the phantom's smile faded and its form began to shift. Clara watched in horror as it morphed into her own reflection, a haunting realization that she was unraveling, losing herself to the darkest corners of her own mind. With one final, desperate effort to break free from the chains of her grief, Clara stepped toward the specter. As tendrils of sorrow threatened to suffocate her, she embraced the pain fully, allowing it to engulf her entire being. The world collapsed around her until all that remained was a void of nothingness. Suspended in darkness, Clara felt the weight of time shift. Days merged into a single, eternal moment. A heartbeat, a breath, an echo of laughter fading into silence where hope could no longer reach. In this unyielding abyss, Clara had finally relinquished control. Her sanity slipped through her fingers like grains of sand, leaving behind nothing but an endless loop, a prison of her own making. And as the last vestiges of her consciousness faded, she realized that in her quest to escape grief, she had become one with it, eternally embraced by the very sorrow she sought to flee. In the fading light of a blood-red sun, Dr. Clara Jensen stood before the decaying lighthouse, its weathered form a stark sentinel against the tumultuous sea. The salty air whipped her hair, carrying whispers of forgotten tales and lost souls. Her eyes, hidden behind dark lenses, scanned the crumbling structure with a mixture of scientific curiosity and inexplicable dread. The lighthouse had stood abandoned for decades, its once proud beacon now dark and lifeless. Yet, as Clara approached, she felt an otherworldly pull, as if unseen hands were guiding her towards its weathered door. She had come to study coastal erosion, but the legends of the vanished keeper tugged at the edges of her rational mind. With a deep breath that tasted of brine and decay, Clara pushed open the door. It creaked on rusted hinges, a mournful sound that echoed through the hollow tower. The air inside was thick, with the weight of untold stories, pressing against her skin like a shroud. The spiral staircase stretched upwards into darkness, each step a testament to time's relentless march. As Clara ascended, the wood groaned beneath her feet, as if protesting this intrusion into its solitude. The higher she climbed, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, until she felt as though she were wading through the very essence of melancholy. At last, she emerged into the lantern room, a circular chamber where shadows danced in the dying light. Dust motes swirled in the air, catching the last rays of sun that filtered through grimy windows. Clara's eyes were drawn to a weathered table, upon which lay an open logbook. Its pages yellowed with age. With trembling fingers, she traced the faded ink of the final entry. The tide has turned, and the winds carry secrets of those who dwelled here. I must warn them. They will come for me. The words seemed to writhe on the page, each letter a serpent of foreboding. As Clara delved deeper into the keeper's descent into madness, a gust of wind rattled the windows, startling her. She snapped the book shut, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In the corners of her vision, shadows seemed to coalesce and retreat, always just beyond the reach of her gaze. Determined to focus on her work, Clara began setting up her equipment. But as she moved about the room, the whispers began. At first, they were no more than the sigh of the wind, but slowly they grew more insistent, more coherent. "Leave," they hissed. "Turn back while you still can." The scientist in Clara fought against the rising tide of fear, rationalizing the sounds as tricks of the wind and her own overactive imagination. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the lighthouse into twilight, the whispers swelled into a cacophony of tormented voices. "Hello?" she called out, her voice thin and reedy in the gloom. "Is anyone here?" The silence that followed was more terrifying than any response could have been. It was a silence pregnant with malevolence, a void that seemed to hunger for her very essence. As Clara stumbled back against the curved wall, the shadows in the room began to move with purpose. They swirled and coalesced, taking on a form that both was and wasn't there. The translucent figure of a man materialized before her, his features flickering like a candle in the wind. "Help me!" The apparition rasped, his voice a symphony of anguish. "They know you're here." Clara's mind reeled, struggling to process the impossible sight before her. "Who?" she managed to choke out. "Who knows I'm here?" A grotesque smile twisted the specter's features. "They feast on fear," he intoned. "The abandoned in this place, they do not let go. You're trapped now, just as I am." Panic surged through Clara's veins as she lunged for the door, but it slammed shut of its own accord, an invisible force sealing her fate. The whispers that had haunted the edges of her consciousness now rose to a fever pitch, a chorus of the damned crying out for release. The walls of the lighthouse seemed to contract, the very air growing thick and oppressive. Clara felt the weight of countless unseen eyes upon her, each gaze a dagger of ice in her soul. "Leave, you must leave," the keeper's ghost wailed. "But if you choose to stay—" His words were drowned out by the thunderous sound of footsteps echoing from everywhere and nowhere. The shadows that had danced at the edges of Clara's vision now surged forward, taking on grotesque forms of long-dead sailors and lighthouse keepers. They swarmed around her, their ethereal hands clawing at her, each touch leaving trails of frost on her skin. "Help us," they moaned in unison, their voices a discordant symphony of despair. Clara sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the onslaught of otherworldly anguish. The keeper's ghost hovered before her, his eyes blazing with an unearthly light. "Don't give in," he cried. "Fight it." In that moment, teetering on the brink of madness, Clara clung to the memory of why she had come. The passion for her work, the love of the sea and its mysteries, became a lifeline in the maelstrom of horror that surrounded her. With a primal scream of defiance, she hurled the logbook to the floor. The impact seemed to shatter reality itself. A blinding light exploded outward, momentarily banishing the shadows and silencing the wails of the damned. In that instant of clarity, Clara seized her chance. She wrenched open the door and fled down the winding staircase, the howls of the trapped souls nipping at her heels. As she burst out of the lighthouse and into the night, Clara risked one final glance back. The beacon atop the tower flickered to life, a pulsing, malevolent eye that seemed to follow her every move. In the lantern room, she could just make out the figure of the keeper, forever trapped, forever watching. Clara ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out. She knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that she had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The lighthouse stood as a monument to lost souls and broken dreams, waiting patiently for its next victim. As she collapsed on the rocky shore, the distant wail of the foghorn seemed to carry a warning. Some mysteries are best left unsolved, some doors best left unopened. For in the shadowy realm between the living and the dead, there are horrors that no mortal mind was meant to comprehend. In the fading twilight of a sultry summer evening, Evan Blackwood descended into the depths of his newly acquired Victorian mansion, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten secrets. The basement, a cavernous space that whispered of untold histories, lay before him like a canvas awaiting the brush of renovation. Fragments of drywall littered the floor, pale as bleached bones in the dim light that seeped through cobweb-shrouded windows. Evan's hands, calloused from years of restoring forgotten homes, gripped the hammer with a familiar intensity. Each strike echoed through the hollow chambers of the house, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to awaken something long dormant. The neighbors' tales of the home's dark past flitted through his mind like restless spirits, but he dismissed them as mere folklore, the imaginings of idle minds. As he chipped away at the brittle plaster, his eyes caught a glimmer of something beneath, a circular symbol etched deep into the wall, its lines pulsing with an otherworldly energy. The air around him chilled, raising gooseflesh along his arms. This was no simple relic of the past, but a sigil that seemed to breathe with malevolent life. Memories of the home's previous owners, a couple who vanished without a trace, surged unbidden into Evan's thoughts. He shook his head, trying to dispel the growing unease that coiled in his gut like a serpent. He had work to do, renovations to complete before his daughter Lily arrived for the summer. There was no time for flights of fancy or superstitious fears. Hours slipped by like sand through an hourglass, the light outside fading to a whisper of twilight. Evan's hammer paused mid-swing as a low rumble emanated from the wall, vibrating the very air around him. The sound morphed into a guttural growl, as if some ancient beast stirred from its slumber deep within the earth. The sigil flared to life, bathing the basement in an eerie, pulsating glow. A rush of wind swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of decay and otherworldly spices. Compelled by a mixture of terror and insatiable curiosity, Evan reached out to touch the throbbing symbol. In that instant, reality fractured. The wall split open like a wound in the fabric of the universe, revealing a swirling vortex of mist and alien stars. Evan stumbled backward, his tools clattering to the floor as his heart thundered in his chest. Yet even as fear threatened to overwhelm him, a perverse fascination took hold. He leaned closer, peering into the otherworldly portal. Shapes wreathed within, blots of darkness and fleeting figures that defied comprehension, their forms fluid and ever-changing. They twisted and shrieked, their alien voices a cacophony that threatened to shatter his sanity. Panic warred with curiosity in Evan's mind. He thought of Lily, her voice soft and filled with wonder, always urging him to explore, to be brave. Was this the curiosity he had nurtured in her? Or was it a trap, laid by forces beyond mortal understanding? With a deep breath that tasted of stardust and eternity, Evan stepped through the portal. The basement fell away, replaced by an ocean of infinite blackness. Chaotic bursts of color, jagged yellows and bloody reds, clashed in a tumultuous dance that threatened to sweep him into oblivion. The very laws of existence twisted and warped, turning Evan's insides into a maelstrom of conflicting sensations. Desperately, he searched for solid ground, feeling ephemeral tendrils brush against his skin like smoke given form. The void seemed to pulse with an alien heartbeat, each throb sending waves of terror and ecstasy coursing through his veins. "Daddy?" a voice called out, sweet, innocent, yet tinged with an unsettling echo that reverberated through the cosmic abyss. Evan's heart plummeted. Lily wasn't supposed to be here, in this realm of madness and wonder. "Lily, stay back," he shouted, his voice swallowed by the vastness around him. The mists coiled tighter, humming with her name in 1,000 overlapping voices, as if the very fabric of this alien dimension sought to consume her essence. Shapes began to materialize from the swirling chaos. Countless figures, vibrant and alive, their features morphing into grotesque reflections of humanity. They were neither monster nor friend, but cosmic horrors that flickered to life beneath stars that had never graced earthly skies. "Help me, Daddy." Lily's voice rang out again, now a keening wail that seemed to draw closer with each passing moment. Realization washed over Evan like a tide of ice. This was no trick of the mind. His daughter was here, trapped in the folds of this nightmarish dimension he had foolishly entered. Driven by primal fear and paternal love, Evan hurled himself toward the source of her voice, searching the darkness for her small, fragile form. The entities lunged at him, their mouths gaping wide, yearning for flesh and soul alike. He fought through their icy touch, grasping desperately for his daughter. In a blinding flash of cosmic energy, a tendril of impossible cold wrapped around Evan's arm. He screamed, his very being yearning to be free as he was pulled deeper into the void. He couldn't stay, couldn't let them take Lily. Just as his fingers brushed against the warmth of her hand, he felt something ancient and terrible seep into the space around him. A moment of clarity struck, sharp as a blade, just before the sight before him liquefied into a kaleidoscope of bright oblivion. The last words he heard belonged to the blackness itself, slithering around him like a lover's caress. "We are never alone." In the mundane basement above, the Victorian house settled back into its ominous silence. The warmth of the fading evening sun cast long shadows across its beleaguered walls, oblivious to the cosmic drama that had unfolded beneath. An ordinary hammer lay next to the glaring sigil, vibrant and undisturbed, awaiting its next visitor, its unsuspecting prey in the grand tapestry of horrors that stretched across dimensions unknown to mortal minds. The subway car lurched forward, its ancient metal bones groaning in protest as it plunged deeper into the bowels of the city. Mia Hart, a woman whose soul had been hollowed by grief, clung to the cold steel pole, her knuckles white with tension. The flickering fluorescent lights cast an eerie pallor over the faces of her fellow passengers, transforming them into ghastly specters that seemed to dance at the edge of her vision. As the train hurtled through the darkness, Mia felt the familiar tendrils of panic creeping up her spine. 2 months had passed since David, her beloved husband, had been torn from her by the cruel hands of fate. Now, in this underground purgatory, she sought an escape from the emptiness that consumed her waking hours. Instead, she found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The air grew thick and oppressive, heavy with the scent of decay and forgotten dreams. Mia's eyes darted from face to face, searching for a glimmer of humanity in the sea of blank expressions. But each visage she encountered seemed to morph and twist, revealing the hideous masks that lay beneath their mortal facades. A man in a tattered overcoat caught her gaze, his sunken eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. As their eyes locked, Mia felt a jolt of recognition, not of the man himself, but of the profound loneliness that radiated from his very being. In that moment, she saw a reflection of her own despair, a mirror of the aching void that David's death had left within her. The train shuddered violently, and the lights flickered once more. In the brief instant of darkness, Mia felt a cold hand brush against her cheek. She recoiled, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribcage. When the lights sputtered back to life, the man in the overcoat had vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of grave soil and forgotten promises. Panic surged through Mia's veins as she realized the car was now empty, save for herself and the shadows that danced at the edges of her vision. The rhythmic clacking of the wheels against the tracks took on a sinister cadence, whispering fragments of half-remembered conversations and broken vows. "Mia," a voice called out, soft and familiar. She whirled around, her breath catching in her throat as she saw David standing at the far end of the car. He looked just as he had on that fateful night, his eyes twinkling with mischief and love. "Come home, my love," he beckoned, extending his hand toward her. Tears blurred Mia's vision as she stumbled forward, her heart aching with a desperate longing. But with each step she took, David seemed to recede further into the shadows. The air grew colder, and Mia felt the weight of countless unseen eyes upon her. "You can't escape us," the shadows hissed, their voices a cacophony of lost souls and broken dreams. Mia's wrist throbbed with phantom pain, a reminder of the fracture that had never truly healed, neither in body nor in spirit. As she reached for David's outstretched hand, the world around her began to warp and twist. The walls of the subway car melted away, revealing a vast expanse of nothingness that threatened to swallow her whole. Mia screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. She was falling, tumbling through an endless void of memories and regrets. When she opened her eyes, Mia found herself back in the tiny cabin nestled at the foot of the mountain. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. For a moment, she dared to hope that it had all been a terrible dream. The accident, the grief, the nightmarish subway ride. But as she moved to stand, the familiar ache in her wrist reminded her of the truth. This was no dream, but a cruel reality that repeated itself endlessly, trapping her in a loop of sorrow and despair. Days blurred together, each one a mirror of the last. Mia arranged wildflowers on the table, lit the gas heater, and prepared meager meals that went uneaten. And always, as night fell, the tapping at the window would begin. On what might have been the fourth or fifth iteration of this torment, Mia made a desperate choice. She ventured beyond the cabin's walls into crisp mountain air that tasted of freedom and possibility. Yet even as she ventured into the woods, something deep within her whispered a warning. "Leave me alone," she screamed into the void, her voice echoing off ancient pines that stood as silent witnesses to her torment. The forest responded with a subtle shift, a rustling whisper that taunted, "You chose this." With each passing day, Mia confronted the depths of her despair. The specter at the window returned. Its face was a kaleidoscope of loved ones lost and found. Each incarnation forced her to relive agony, to confront unresolved pain that bound her to this purgatory of her own making. As dawn broke once more, Mia stood before the phantom wearing David's beloved face. "I won't let you control me any longer," she declared fiercely with newfound resolve. But in that moment of defiance, the specter's smile faded, its form began to shift. Mia watched in horror as it morphed into her own reflection, a haunting realization that she was unraveling, losing herself to darkest corners of her mind. With one final desperate effort to break free from chains of grief, Mia stepped toward Spectre. As tendrils of sorrow threatened to suffocate her, she embraced pain fully, allowing it to engulf entire being. The world collapsed around until all that remained was void of nothingness. Suspended in darkness, Mia felt time shift. Days merged into single eternal moment, a heartbeat, a breath, an echo laughter fading into silence where hope could no longer reach. In this unyielding abyss, Mia had finally relinquished control, sanity slipped through fingers like grained sand, leaving behind nothing but endless loop, a prison of own making. And as last vestiges consciousness faded, she realized that in quest to escape grief, she had become one with it. Eternally embraced by very sorrow sought flee. The velvet darkness whispered its secrets, and Mia Hart, once woman flesh-blood, became legend, whispered around campfires. A cautionary tale, love loss, and dangers holding tightly to that which we can never truly possess. The sun hung like a gilded orb in the azure sky, its golden rays caressing the pristine sands of Coral Haven Resort. Sarah and Jake, newlyweds intoxicated by love and the promise of paradise, stood at the threshold of the shimmering sea. Their laughter, tinged with the sweetness of honeymoon bliss, mingled with the rhythmic lapping of waves against the shore. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic scene, an ancient hunger stirred, undulating along the ocean floor with predatory grace. Sarah, her lithe form silhouetted against the dazzling expanse of water, called out to her hesitant husband, "Come on, Jake. The water's perfect." Her voice dripped with enthusiasm, a siren's call that pierced the salty air. She was a portrait of unwitting bliss, her sun-kissed hair dancing in the ocean breeze like strands of spun gold. But Jake hesitated, a knot of primal fear tightening in his stomach as the tide receded, revealing an eerie abyss that stretched out before them. It was a gaping maw that yearned for flesh, its depths concealing secrets as old as time itself. "Just 5 more minutes, okay?" he replied, his eyes fixed on the ominous horizon where sea met sky in a shimmering mirage. The ocean twisted and churned, waves roiling as if disturbed by some unseen leviathan lurking beneath. Yet, the sun sparkled seductively on the surface, a beguiling illusion that tempted Jake to surrender to its allure. After a few moments of playful coaxing from Sarah, he succumbed to desire and joined her at the water's edge. As they waded deeper into the crystalline waters, Jake felt the cool embrace of the sea envelop him. An unsettling shiver climbed down his spine as he sensed the currents shifting almost deliberately around him, like tendrils of some vast aquatic beast. Sarah, oblivious to the danger, dove beneath the waves with childlike abandon. Floating on his back, Jake peered up at the cloudless sky, a canvas of endless blue. Suddenly, something brushed against his leg. A fish? A stray piece of seaweed? Chills prickled along his arms as he quickly sat up in the water, scanning the depths with wide eyes. The ocean had grown too calm, too still, as if holding its breath in anticipation. "Hurry up, Jake. Join me," Sarah called from a distance, her laughter ringing hollow against the backdrop of growing unease. Jake plunged into the embrace of the waves, feeling the transient thrill of submersion. But that exhilaration quickly turned to dread as he noticed the marine life around him shifting erratically, schools of fish darting away with sudden urgency. "Sarah?" he called, his voice swallowed by the water. Panic wrapped around his throat like a constrictor as he swam towards the shore. But the current seemed to pull him backward, dragging him into a whirlpool of salty despair. Then a sound pierced the serene environment, a haunting melody surfacing from the depths below. It was a soft, siren song that halted Jake mid-stroke, entrancing him with its otherworldly beauty. The melody felt alive, calling to him with a seductive promise of eternal bliss. But deep within his soul, Jake knew better than to heed its call. "Jake!" Sarah's voice cut through his trance, urgent and filled with fear. She had emerged from the water, her wet hair framing her face like a halo of dark seaweed. "What are you doing? Come back." The siren's call intensified, and with it, the water surged around Jake. He turned, battling against the ever-growing tide, but it conspired against him. No longer just a passive medium, the ocean writhed violently, hungry for flesh and souls. He could see her now, struggling against the tide, panic dancing in her eyes like trapped fireflies. The gentle waves morphed into churning torrents, crashing around her and pulling her unaware towards the hungry depths. "Hold on!" Jake shouted, his heart racing with the fury of 1,000 storms. He lunged towards her, but every stroke felt futile, as if he were swimming through molasses. With a final desperate push, he reached her hand just as the water surged again. He pulled her close, but the very water around them convulsed, becoming a whirlpool that clutched at their legs like skeletal fingers. Sarah gasped, finally realizing the truth that Jake had sensed all along. This was no ordinary ocean. It was alive and ravenous. In a flash of panic, they exchanged glances, fear distorting time and space around them. And then, as if sensing the couple's growing despair, the water dropped away, revealing a horrifying truth. The sand shifted beneath them to form a great maw, replete with jagged teeth carved from coral and seaweed. "Jake! What?" Sarah's scream was drowned out by the roar of the tide as the ocean rose, swallowing them in one brutal motion. As the water closed in, Jake's vision blurred, the world reduced to a kaleidoscope of blues and greens. Grasping desperately for Sarah, he felt her hands slip from his grip, lost in the dark depths that seemed to stretch into eternity. And then, silence. An all-encompassing quiet that pressed against Jake's eardrums with the weight of the entire ocean. In that moment of utter stillness, he felt a presence, ancient, vast, and utterly alien. It regarded him with cold curiosity, this fragile creature of flesh and bone who had dared to enter its domain. As consciousness began to fade, Jake saw flashes of a world beyond imagination. Coral cities that sprawled across the ocean floor, inhabited by beings that defied description. He glimpsed the true face of the sea, a sentient entity as old as the earth itself, forever hungry, forever patient. His last thought was of Sarah, hoping against hope that she had somehow escaped the ocean's insatiable appetite. Then darkness claimed him, and Jake became one with the sea. Somewhere far above, the sun shone bright and indifferent. The resort buzzed with laughter, and the waves continued to crash rhythmically against the shore, their turbulent nature concealed beneath a tranquil facade. All that remained was the wind, a whispering reminder of the couple who would never return, lost to the ocean's embrace, their souls joining countless others in the vast, eternal dance of the deep.
We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale. If it sent shivers down your spine, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part? Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky and remember, sometimes the darkest shadows hide the most terrifying secret.